guys, welcome back to Good by Grains. Today we are making pumpkin chili. Now that October has rolled around and we are smack dab in the middle of fall, I am cooking with pretty much all things pumpkin. Almost every single new recipe that I've been making this month has pumpkin in it, and I'm also making some of my pumpkin favorites. So this is my pumpkin chili. We have some beef. Now this is about 1.5 pounds of this grass-fed beef. My husband and I actually got a quarter of a grass-fed cow this year, and I'll probably make a video about that in a couple weeks of kind of how we went about that, but that is the beef. We have some coconut oil. This is what we're going to be cooking everything in. An onion and some garlic cloves, some broth. Now we only use about a couple cups of this. I don't have any stock on hand that is homemade, so you can definitely substitute homemade stock if you have some. We have the most important ingredient, which is the pumpkin. Now the ingredient is just pumpkin. There's no sugar added, it's not like pumpkin pie filling, you just want pure pumpkin. We're not using the whole can, so don't worry. And then for the spices, we have chili powder and cumin. We have our normal kosher salt, and then this time we're using some white pepper. And then we're just gonna use a touch of cinnamon and some oregano. These are both pretty strong flavors, so we're not gonna go crazy on these. And then last, we're just gonna throw in a bay leaf or two as the soup is simmering. So let's make the chili. Okay, so I have a Dutch oven over about medium-high heat. I put a tablespoon of coconut oil in the bottom and let this pan heat up for probably about 5 to 7 minutes. You want it evenly heated with the coconut melted. I cut up our beef into approximately like 1 inch or so size cubes, just larger than bite size, and I dried it with a paper towel. The reason for that is you want this meat to really sear in the pan. You don't want it to steam, and if you have additional kind of moisture on the beef, it's gonna not cook quite as well. So first thing, we just want to season this with just a little bit of kosher salt. And then you carefully, because you don't want the oil to spray up at you, you just don't want to dump this in. You can kind of carefully just put the beef down, and you should hear that sizzle. And now you want to sear the beef on each side, kind of moving it around. You don't need to sear it on every single side, but you definitely want to sear it on a few of the sides. And then the last thing is you definitely don't want to crowd the pan, because if you crowd the pan, that's when it's going to steam the beef instead of searing it. So we'll do this first batch and then remove it back to a plate, and then do the second batch, and then we'll be ready to move on to our onions. Okay, so we seared the other half of the beef, so we can add it back to our plate. And I only seared this, it only takes a few minutes each side, so even though this might seem like a huge extra step, it's definitely worth it, because see all this flavoring on the bottom that we have? That's just really gonna add a nice flavor to the chili, and then this beef is going to get really tender as it simmers. So we can take all of the beef out. And the reason that we're doing this is because we want to cook the onions separately. We don't want the onions to cook within the beef, because then they're not really gonna saute. So we're gonna add another spoonful, approximately a tablespoon of coconut oil to the pan. And you want to allow that to kind of melt, and then once that's melted, then we are going to add our onion. And so this is our white onion that I chopped pretty finely. It's definitely not a mince, but it's not giant chunks. You don't want huge chunks of the onion, so definitely cut it on the smaller side. So our coconut oil is almost all the way melted. So now you can carefully add the onion. And you definitely want to hear that sizzle. So you can kind of stir it around to coat in the coconut oil. And then you want to turn your heat down a little bit to about medium so that the onions don't burn. You want to cook the onions a little bit slower than you cooked the beef. So you can kind of turn that down. And the onions are going to take about 10 minutes. You definitely want these to lightly caramelize, become translucent, but definitely keep an eye on and make sure they don't burn. Okay, so it's been about 10 minutes, so we can actually turn the heat back up a little bit. And we're going to add our garlic. And this is just 3 cloves of minced garlic. You definitely don't want to add that at the beginning of cooking the onions just because you don't want it to burn. The onions can definitely take more heat than the garlic can. So you can kind of mix that around. And now what we're going to do is we're actually going to toast the pumpkin. So we can kind of spread the onions out around the sides. And you want to add another tablespoon of the coconut oil. It's actually closer to a little over 1/2 of a tablespoon. You can kind of add that right in the center. And then this is our pumpkin. I just opened up the can and took about 1 cup out. And so you can kind of move that coconut oil around. And what we're going to do is put the pumpkins right in the center and kind of slightly toast it. So you can kind of spread the pumpkin out a little bit. And then you want to just let it cook like that for about 2 minutes or so. After about 2 minutes, you kind of want to carefully sort of fold it over so you get to toast the other side. And then once the pumpkin is toasted, we can add our spices and kind of allow those to bloom in the oil. Okay, so now I'm not sure if you can see, but the pumpkin is definitely turned slightly more of like a light brown orange. It's not bright orange anymore, and that's from toasting it. And so we can kind of now mix this all together with the onions. And then now we're going to add our spices. And we definitely want to add the spices right now before we've added any of the liquid, just so that we can kind of use a little bit of that leftover oil to help bloom the spices. So we have our chili powder, and you just want to dump these right into the center. We have some cumin. And then we're just going to add a touch of cinnamon. And some oregano. And then our white pepper. Now the reason why we're using white pepper and not cayenne pepper is I don't want to make this too spicy. So this is only, you can use anywhere from 1/4 to 1/2 of a teaspoon of white pepper. You certainly can use cayenne if you would prefer that. And then lastly, we're going to add some of our salt. Now, how much salt you add really depends on your broth and also on your tomatoes, which completely forgot to show you guys those during the beginning. But we can kind of just let these spices really toast. So you can kind of just move them around. Definitely keep an eye on this. Don't walk away. This is only going to take about 30 to 45 seconds. So you can kind of move these around. And once they kind of look like they're starting to toast and get well combined with some of the oil, they kind of like clump up, then you can mix everything together. And you kind of, this is when a wooden spoon really comes in handy. You can kind of scrape all the stuff off the bottom and mix it around. Now once you've done that, you're going to carefully add your tomato. This is 1.5 cups of crushed tomatoes. I'll definitely make sure I put that in the ingredient list since I forgot to have it out in the beginning. So you can kind of carefully pour the tomatoes in. You want to make sure you get all of that. Stir this around with the pumpkin and the spices. You definitely want to do this very carefully. And then you are going to add in some of your stock. Now this is when you can also scrape up any additional bits. You're kind of using the stock to loosen some of the spices that kind of are on the bottom of the pan. So you can just pour in a little bit and then just use your wooden spoon to kind of scrape that stuff up. And as you can see, you're definitely getting a lot of it up off the bottom. So you can kind of continue doing that. Then once you have all of that flavor up off the bottom, you can add your beef and any beef juices back in. Stir that around. And then you're gonna add more of your stock. You can stir to combine. You want to make sure that everything's kind of all one mixture. You don't want it to be like super thick tomato and pumpkin and then having just the liquid sitting right on the top. So just kind of stir this around carefully. You can add your bay leaves. I just have some small ones, so I'm adding 2 of them. You can kind of press those down, and then we are going to add our lid. And you can turn the heat down to a simmer, and we're gonna simmer this for about an hour and a half or so until the beef is nice and tender. Okay, so it's been just over an hour and a half that this has been simmering. And so now you can either let it fully cool and store it in the fridge, or you can fish out the bay leaves and it's ready to serve. So I hope you'll try this chili recipe this fall. It is the perfect make-ahead meal. Chili always tastes better the second day anyway, and so I always try to make this like on a Saturday and then keep it in the fridge, and it is perfect on Sunday to watch some football and just relax on the couch. So give this recipe a shot. I will see you guys next week. Bye.